This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, we're gonna call the PDC meeting to order. And by the way, if you don't know, I'm not Trinae Twiggy.
Do we have any of these?
But you're a fabulous villain.
So, once again, we have some new members here, so we will start with introductions again for Mr. Winter and for Clarence's behalf. So, Winter, if you will start, please, sir.
My name is Winter Bend. I work for the city of Lynchburg as city manager.
John Sharp, Bedford County Board of Supervisors.
Robert Hiss, Bedford County Administrator.
I'm Clarence Mundy. I'm the interim manager in Alta Vista.
Dwayne Tuggle, I'm Mayor of Town of Amherst. And now I'm relinquishing my post to Ms. Trinae Tweedy. We're introducing everybody now. That's where we're at.
Good.
Welcome. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, I'm sorry. So Trinae Tweedy, Lynchburg City Council. Are we going around the table?
You may not know Clarence Mundy.
Nice to
He
meet you.
is the interim in Alta Vista.
Okay, thank you.
I'm the new city manager in Lynchburg.
She probably once or twice.
I think y'all met once or twice.
I'm Gary
Nice to
Christie
meet
from the Planning District Commission.
Hi, everybody. Megan Lucas, Lynchburg Regional Business Alliance.
I'm Dean Rogers. I'm Clarence's replacement at Amherst.
Oh, those were the days.
Good evening, everybody. Frank Rogers, Campbell County.
Sarah Carter, Town of Amherst.
I've already introduced myself. Read you up.
Oh, I'm Reed Welcome, the Deputy City Manager.
Rosalie Majerus, Central Virginia Planning District.
Kelly Hitchcock, CVPDC.
Is-
Huntsberger, CVPDC.
All right. Is that everyone?
That's
Thank
it.
you very
Yeah.
much. All right, well, welcome everyone. And second, we will consideration of any requests for electronic meeting participation.
I have not had any requests.
Okay.
Wayne Mitchell from Alta Vista, the citizen representative, member of City Town Council, has said he's going to join us electronically, but he's not interested in voting or being a part of the quorum. So as far as I know, there's nobody that will join us electronically that is seeking to have a vote.
All right, thank you. And we now have the minutes of July 15th, 2021. And has everyone reviewed those? Seeking a vote to approve it? Are there any amendments or edits or changes that anyone knows about?
Move for approval is presented.
Okay, thank you. The motion has been heard.
Second.
All right, thank you. Ready for vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have traditionally had the manager from the town, from the jurisdiction, serve as treasurer when the elected official serves as chair. Now, we've kept the treasurer position open for the PDC for Mr. Bender to get on board and ask him what he wanted to serve as
And I promptly said no.
treasurer. And he said, give me another year, give me another cycle.
Breaking decades of tradition.
I'm so sorry.
Proud of you. Proud of you, man. Proud of you.
So we have come up with a proposal to have the current treasurer, Gary Shannenberger, serve until the end of December and have Sarah Carter, who will be the incoming treasurer, just pick it up 6 months earlier and serve an 18-month term.
Sarah, I will, indebted, and I will make sure we go to lunch or something else. And same thing for Gary. Where is Gary? Is Gary here?
You're overpaying, Winter. Not that big of a time.
Gary, for the next 5 years, all those in big.
If only I had known that you were allowed to say no. Am I allowed to say no?
No.
I wouldn't either.
So that's the staff proposal. Both of the folks have said they would do that, I think extra 6 months, if so elected.
So moved.
Second.
Any other discussion, any other nominations? We'll call for the question. All in favor of Sarah Carter as treasurer beginning January the 1st, 2022? Please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Sarah, and congratulations.
Thank
You get a crown.
Still taking my family lunch.
Absolutely.
Turn it down.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Next is our financial report. Rosalie?
Thank you. 2 months into the year, not that much activity at this point, just a couple of items to highlight. And I'm on attachment 5A, page 1. Under health insurance, we fund, for those people who are in the high deductible plan, we fund a small amount for their HSA, and that is why health insurance looks a little out of skew. And then dropping down under dues and subscriptions, a lot of our dues are paid upfront for the fiscal year, and that is why that's a little bit high. Jumping over to page 2, really nothing much to highlight there. We do have a budget adjustment that is proposed in the next item, and that is the $2,000 expense side that's showing. And then on page 3, same under the budget adjustments, we have the revenue for the Bedford Town CVPDC project. And as far as the revenues go for actuals, a lot of our revenues are not billed till the end of the quarter. So that's why there's not a lot of stuff there. Are there any particular questions?
Estimated fund balance down a little bit. Am I correctly recalling that's what we pulled some money out for?
We have
Technical.
the 134 that CVCC that they didn't use last year, so we did put it in this year, so that's affecting that. And then we have $30,000 for sets that is drawing that number down.
Thank you.
We are told that the Technology Council, the old CAER, will repay the $30,000 loan that we made to them in 2009 when they clear out their books. So over the next 60 days or so, we should see that full loan repaid, close to it anyway. We do ask you to approve the budget amendment for the Bedford Town CDBG project. The governor just announced those in July or late June. Our budget was set in April. So throughout the year, we make adjustments as contracts come and go. And this contract is for us, $13,200 in revenue, $2,000 in expected expenses to manage that CDBG project for this fiscal year. So we would like to have a motion to incorporate that into our budget.
I'll move to approve that budget amendment.
Second.
Motion's been made second. Any questions? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Proposal, it passes.
Thank you. We typically determine our dues rate, our local dues rate in the fall, so that jurisdictions have plenty of time as they build their budgets in the spring to factor that in. Last year was the first year over maybe 7 or 8 that we had a dues increase, and we increased our dues by a penny, 1 cent. This year, I'm recommending a 3-cent increase. It would generate a little less than $9,000 for the PDC, but we did that each year for several years. Have some money to work with.
Have you increased it each year?
We looked at an increase for over 6 years at 3 cents. you'd have almost $50,000 there of new money. Now, you're not, this,
You're saying 3 cents and then hold it at 3, or are you saying increase it this year at 3 and then increase it the following year at 3? Which one are you saying?
I understand the staff right up to 3 each year for the next 6 years.
That's what I read.
yes, that's the principle. What you're being asked to decide is just for 22, 23. So you're only obligating 1 year. But in theory, in principle, you ought to look at multiple years of a dues increase to get a greater amount of money for staffing, for operations, and for services. But for the request on the table is to deal with FY 22, 23, just for next year's.
Madam Chair, if I might. So Gary, I'm generally friendly to doing a little bit at a time instead of a big whack, after a long wait. But this seems to be part of a 6-year strategy. I don't like an 18-cent increase, but okay. It's not a ton of money really when you factor it out. But what is it for? Like, what are we trying to achieve? So if at the end of the day we have $50,000, are we trying to get to a place where we have added a staff person, or are we just saying roughly 3 cents a year gets us inflation? What's the strategy informed by?
We have needed and have talked about for several years another staff person related to communications. Communications is something that we typically don't bill somebody for. It is our planners are often billed to the projects that they work on or the contracts that we have. But a communications person is more like an administrative assistant, where they don't have build projects to build to that people pay us to do. So that my sense is that we are working towards a communication staff, graphics, social media, so forth.
So that's where we would be 6 years from now, because you have sufficient rate increase to fund that. But in the interim, you're going to pick up $9,000 a year. So what's the plan to make sure we don't expend $9,000 a year and, it's not all there in year 6? Does that make sense, what I'm asking? Is it going to be incrementally expended on things that are one-time expenses, so that by the time you're at year 6, it's all there as a windfall to fund a $50,000 position?
Probably one-time expenses.
Yeah, I see what you're just saying. If you build it into your budget,
It's going to get lost in the shuffle,
yeah,
and in
then
6
you
years,
don't
we're going to
really
need the
have-
position. So
you only have the final year's incremental increase.
that's right. Whereas if we sort of go into this knowing, all right, Cam, and again, I'm here to make the meeting worth attending. So it's $1,700. Then so from Campbell.
Yeah, I was going to say,
So I don't want to lose a lot of sleep over it, but it gets expended year over year, and then it's not there to recognize your ultimate plan. So if it is $9,000 for one-time stuff each year, I'm okay with that. And then see each year over year if we're willing to take on the rate increase, and we haven't built in recurring expectations. I don't think I'm making it very eloquently.
Well, I think the way to make that work would be to create a committed fund, that this would be a recurring revenue into that committed fund. So you can pull money out of that fund on a vote of this group for one-time projects, but that revenue would still be there every year. And if we got to the point, it's not going to grow if we spend it. It doesn't need to grow, because by the end of 6 years, that recurring commitment will now have grown to, what was it, 6 years you said? 18 cents. So that's how I would do it in my budget. I would create a committed fund to say, this is for staffing in year whatever. This is the year 28 fund.
Gary, when you think about the strength of the PDC and the future projects and future needs, does that future need really embody a communications person, or is it another or a different person? Is that really the needed person?
it would either be a communication person or another planner,
Yeah.
just for additional services to our jurisdiction.
Yeah.
And we've always had trouble getting the message out about who we are, what we do, as well as meeting the short-term requests from our jurisdictions. Something that they haven't planned on comes up, a grant or a project. How do we provide that staff support when our existing staff's already booked out for the year with our contracts? So yes, it's both.
Yes.
So I'm agreeable to the proposal for 3 cents, pending board approval, obviously, when we build the budget. But I would make that in the absence of a commitment for out years. I understand it's year one of a 6-year plan, but I'll take up next year's request next year. Does that make sense? And I want us to be mindful, if it does pass in the development of the budget, that we stay focused on this additional revenue so that it doesn't get, and I don't mean this disrespectfully to staff, I'm just not using delicate language, frittered away, such that at some point in the future when we need it, it's not there, right? So if it's effective to the organization to raise rates with those guardrails on it, I'd support it right now. But if that's too constrictive and no longer worth it, then I'd defer to staff to say, come up with a different strategy.
I'd kind of like to know, what you're dealing with inflation. I mean, in Amherst, we've tracked it out, and the Fed does a great job of making sure that there's 2% inflation, that the cost of running the county seems to go up about 2% a year. And our revenue rises just about under 1% a year. So, in the last few years, our those lines cross. And where those lines cross is where revenue is not keeping up with expenses. And we've been there. And I wonder if you've thought about when and where that is for the PDC.
No, I think that we do have costs, some costs like this space costs that are inflation based. But, and then salaries, of course, are driven by what projects we have and what monies we have that are above the basic expenses. So no.
Yeah, I know you're driven by grants and you're driven by projects, and that's where your revenue comes from. And it's not like you're tied to property taxes that for us only go up every 6 years. Okay, I'm just curious. I mean, that strikes me as, I'm also agreeable, especially when it comes to utilities like the service authority, that they build in a 1 or 2% increase every year. Nobody notices it. It covers their expenses over time.
CPI, the hidden CPI?
Because they have to deal with it too.
And CPI is looking really ugly this year. If any of you don't
Right.
look,
What's it at?
January to end of July is 4.7%. Yeah. So for those of us who have lots of things that are
Is
based
that
on
annualized or? from
that is for January to the end of July is already at 4.7. And as Dean said, we typically run right around 2% for the year. And so we have several things in our budget that are tied to that. And I'm just looking at it going, that's going to be ugly.
There wasn't 5% raises.
Indeed. Yeah.
Well, I think it's on the same track. It's not going to be 5%. It's going to be, 7 or 8? It's not going to be nice. I'm supportive of it as well for the 1 year.
Can I be a bit of an outlier, if that's okay? Maybe wasn't as dutiful as I should have been with the preparation for the fact as far as the expectation. New to me is, again, and I'm the same guy that punted being treasurer, so I understand that pretty quickly. It seems a little cart before the horse that if I were to position a vote about a 3% increase in advance of not fully even understanding my own budget. And I'll just say I'm super sensitive out here. The idea of raising anything by pennies gets people's cackles up a little bit. And so, and Councilwoman Tweedy, you can put me in my place and say, go ahead and do this right now. Is there some way in which that I can maybe abstain from this vote so that I can get my feet underneath me? And if that throws a wrinkle into everybody's, because what I'm finding is I've got finite resources to do many, many things. And I want to make sure that those resources that we're expending are spending in the proper way. And I know that it's shekels or, what is it, budget lint, they say in the couch or something, but still resources I want to be mindful when I talk to my city council that we're being diligent about. So, because my experience of a PDC is from where I am, I don't know what this one is, Gary. I mean, we've had good conversations, but it's my first meeting. So to the degree that I can abstain and it won't overturn the apple cart, I'd like to do so.
Do we have to decide tonight?
You do not. You need to decide by November.
But really all this does is inform the ask to localities, right? I mean, because none of us are able to, you're exactly right. We've all got those finite resources, and when we get into our own budgets, we're gonna have to decide how meaningful that $1,700 was.
It's been really bad in 5 months when we're actually
Right.
budgeted.
So,
Right.
We vote for a rate increase and the EDC sends an invoice to each of us saying, hey, your rate went up. And you say, nah, I'm not funding that,
Yeah, and I have my concerns in that area. I mean, it seems like every year, Megan's group is,
Our group.
I understand. There's always somebody trying to put that on the chopping block.
Yeah.
And so, it's, as soon as you start talking about rate increases, then a lot of concern about, well, what do we need it for? What are we getting out of it? And we can do just fine without it. And let's not pay that. And I mean, these are the kinds of things that are real conversations. And we're stuck with, Bedford's got to deal with it on both sides as well. So,
that's the annual conversation in local government, right, John? None of us want to raise a tax or raise a fee or raise an expense. So to me, it just comes down to, I would, to use your cart before the horse a little bit, if I might, Winter, I think without a description of what we're going to use $9,000 for in the here and now, it gets a little uncomfortable for me. But understanding there's a long-term strategy, I can kind of get there. I'm just a proponent for a little at a time instead of a lot later. And so I think contemplating 3 pennies when at the end of the day, it's a couple $1,000s for each locality to inform our ask, that maybe we collectively come back as we get into budget more formally and say, hey, we didn't need that $9,000. What do we want to do then? Or we say at Campbell County, thanks for asking, Gary, but we're not doing that. We're going to pay you what we paid last year. I've got a couple of exit ramps, I guess is my point. But for the purpose of where we are today, I think a prudent next step is to factor it in, see where we go over the next few months and see where we end up by the time we're building our budget. So that's my counterpoint to that. I don't disagree. I may be looking for $1,700 to save a position, and I would come right here and take it out. That's how lean we get sometimes, and I sympathize with that a whole lot.
And there's another approach to this too. It's not just cost, there's also savings. I ride the PDC really hard. I squeeze every penny out of them. They are truly an extension of my staff, and we lean on them hard. We get our money's worth out of them. And so, in another way, rather than just keep paying out, making sure you're getting out too.
That's where, to my point, I don't know if, by way of resource, a communications person as opposed to a planner, don't know, right? Is what's being proposed, because I just don't know.
We're talking 6 years to hire a person in that 6th year,
Maybe
maybe.
you're getting in a position where,
well, if you bank it, you could probably do it even earlier.
And again,
Build up, yeah.
going to other savings and cuts, those are sort of annual budget strategies. Are we ready to pull the trigger? I'm not sure in 6 years we'll need a communications person. I mean,
I don't know what's.
But we might need a tax assessment bunch, or we might need, what are the other things that we,
DEQ planner.
just a planner.
yeah.
Yeah.
All kinds of stormwater.
We certainly haven't had any lack of things to spend our capital on in the last few years. It's been nice having money in reserves to be able to do some of the things that the PDC has been able to invest in. And so I'm all about continuing to put money into that capital fund, whether that turns out to be project-based like the CVTC thing, or whether that turns out to be a
Staff.
person.
Well, I think we ought to constantly ask about more from CVPDC. What more can I get out of it? And I'm used to having those conversations with my governing body, but I think there has to be a balance. I want more, but you got to resource a little more too, right? So I think creating a little resource space empowers me to ask for a little bit more, quite frankly. So I just don't think for the actual dollars today, the 3 cents this year, particularly given a couple other outs I've got in the process, is too threatening right now.
But to that point, I mean, even in attachment 5B, where we talked about the additional work for the town of Bedford, you know, the revenues are 13.2, the expenditures are 2,000. That's a delta of 11.2. That's more than the money we're talking about right now.
But that's
Sometimes it's a matter of just,
the local money is only, what, 20% of the budget? That's why I say, I was afraid that this might happen. Consume sort of, $1,000 worth of time, but striking that right balance, we're a small part of the total budget. I just want to make sure that we, stay viable in that regard. And if we don't do it tonight, when we need to do it, it'll be 4, 5, 6 cents, and we'll do what we have to do.
I just think it's easier to do it through natural activities, right? Rather than through dues, because then there's that political aspect. And in some communities, that might not be a big deal. In mine, it is a big deal. And it starts to put crosshairs on things.
I hear that.
I'm just being realistic.
That's one of the reasons we went 7 years without a dues increase, staying below the radar. We made it through those projects and other things that we generate money from. The advantage of dues is that it's dependable money. You can depend on that money coming in each year, whereas projects come and go.
All right, where do we see ourselves on this? Where are we landing?
Well, I think at least 3 of us are in favor of
Yeah,
it.
I'm gonna go ahead
We could
and-
vote today, or we could delay and let.
I'll put a motion in if somebody wants to substitute it or defeat it. That's how this works.
Before you make motions, is it okay that, when does this meet again?
I'm sorry.
When do you meet again?
We meet in October and we'll meet in November.
Okay, so they're next month?
So you can.
I commit that I'll be prepared next month to cast my vote.
Okay, so I will defer then to, I think it's perfectly appropriate to allow the new city manager at least another 30 days to familiarize himself with the organization and ask questions. So I've verbalized my support. I don't think it'll wane between now and October. I am moody, but I don't think. So I'll stand down on that and just sort of ask if it's concurrence of the group, maybe we just pick it back up in 30 days.
Sounds good.
Very good. Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you.
Let's ready for the
All
next one.
right, thank you. Next is regional housing study.
Over the past several meetings, you've heard that the Virginia Housing Corporation wants to provide $2 million to this region for new housing projects. We have 2 actions tonight for you related to this. First of all, we'd like to talk to you about a investment with Rush Homes in using some of that money, $450,000, for an existing project they have under development. And then we'd also like to talk about a regional housing market analysis that would help us determine how to best use the balance of those funds. Now, Rush Homes is a nonprofit who provides housing and support services to help people with disabilities live independently. They're planning 31 affordable and accessible new construction apartments on Florida Avenue in Lynchburg. It's an $8 million project, all of which is secured except that $450,000. We propose to use that to close that financing gap and make those apartments a reality. Funding the Rush Homes project meets our grant obligations for the entire $2 million grant. And you have a briefing paper, there's extra copies available about that. We also would like to have a discussion about a regional housing market assessment that would look at housing in our region and help us with some recommendations, how to use the balance of that $2 million. This housing assessment would be paid 100% by Virginia Housing and not come out of the $2 million grant. Kelly Hitchcock, who is the deputy director now for planning, hooray, hooray, is leading that project. Kelly, got some additional comments?
Just a few, and I didn't have this in here because we hadn't confirmed this at the time, but I want to point out a couple of things with the rush home. That call is that when we talk to them and the 450 meets their gap, and you sort of can, I think it's on page 5, and they sort of have their finances there. The one thing that I did also want to point out that with our 450, what my agreement was with Rush Homes, that 450 that we would use from the $2 million grant that we do have will go exclusively to the construction. So those dollars will not go into those other components, their profit margins, their oversight, any of the soft costs basically. And that also whatever isn't used directly with the construction was the reason that I did that, was that it guarantees that portion of the 450 that's not used, because obviously they're going to go to close, and that's their estimated cost, but we would just be at the construction dollars. And so that's easy to track too, right? So that goes directly with what the project was bid at, and all of the other soft costs that they can change in their loan rates or whatever won't impact that 450,000. As Gary said, it does meet our obligation. As you know, that the Virginia Housing, the 2 million it's 10 units per million. So that's about 100,000, which, you can't build a structure for $100,000. But it comes to, as you can see there, it breaks down to just 14,516 per unit. It clears our obligation of the 20 units. So it leaves us with $1,550,000 to continue, and it buys us time basically. To have, and that's where we sort of came in with the recommendation of also submitting a housing needs assessment. And I want to point out with the needs assessment, it's not only just about how these funds can be utilized, but the needs assessment that is eligible for each locality up to the $20,000 would really inform the continuum of housing needs that each locality has. And that's from low income housing to, or do there need to be $250,000 houses? An example is in the Petersburg area, their housing assessment found that they needed more higher end housing. And the other thing I want to point out is with the needs assessment, an RFP would go in, and what I'm proposing, and we would like to propose, is that a committee would be formed where each locality would determine a representative on a committee, your planning director. And an RFP is submitted with the application. And so each locality would look at that RFP to make sure that needs assessment would be providing what each locality would like to see in consideration of what your housing needs are like, discussions with your business, community to see what they might need. And I can also provide an RFP that's been done. Roanoke Valley has recently done their regional needs assessment in that area, and then West Piedmont is currently doing their regional housing assessment as well.
So you've got to build at least 20 in this year? I mean, what is this?
No, the contract with Virginia Housing is $2 million, but you have to do 10 units per million. And our contract is a 3-year contract. But
you 2 years.
It buys us 2 years. Well, and the requirement of the contract is that you develop a process, a decision-making metric and a decision-making process on what the opportunities are in spending these dollars, right? To make development more palatable to local developers. So yes, it buys some time, and the housing assessment allowed, Virginia Housing is supportive of us, of our region coming in with a housing study, because we don't have one in this region. And it does buy some time for then the localities to be more intricately involved in how you think the remaining dollars should be expended over time in promoting development in your localities, under your direction, which is what it would always be, obviously, your direction.
So having a planning process in place before we spend the bulk of the money gives a much better chance of a successful outcome.
And I understand, especially if you're spending, these grant monies for like the rush homes, right? But I guess I've always thought that the free market sort of figures out what the demand is. Maybe not necessarily what the need is, but if there's money to be made, some developer is going to try to make it. And my concern is that I don't pay for everybody that's going to go on a shelf somewhere. So how is this going to be used? If you can give me the 30-second version of what we're going to do with it once we have it, because I don't know if a developer is going to base his investments, his capital just because of what the study says.
They would. In my experience, and I'm going to interrupt you, but in my experience as an economic developer in Alta Vista, we tried hard to do a housing study there, because especially in rural communities, to have that feasibility done with the data done for a developer, it makes that conversation with the developer easier. And so a feasibility study that says in these communities, the highest and best uses, or the best housing is A, B, C, and D, you've done the work to open the door for the developer to have a longer conversation with those communities.
I got to beat them back from developing right now.
Yes, perhaps you do.
Yeah, but we don't. I mean,
But identifying that gap, you'll have developers who will specialize in, maybe they specialize in low-income housing in rural communities, or they specialize in mid-range. And so you're creating that data point. It's very successful. Housing studies are good.
I want to come back and also point out that we're not asking the PDC for dollars on this. It's funded 100% by the Virginia Housing. And but the secondary component is that what a lot of businesses are finding is that they are having a hard time. Working families are having a hard time in purchasing houses. That's kind of across the nation. We've all heard this. And that was kind of the impetus behind the Virginia Housing funding, is that developers, yes, developers are out there, but they have a market rate, and they have a price point, and they have where they get a profit range, and that's at a certain metric of a house. And so it's what is the unmet need, even if that is a higher end need in some instances. And then how can these funds be able to provide leverage for when, and what a locality needs is maybe $150,000 houses, but no developers aren't interested in $150,000 houses because there's just not enough profit there for them. But these dollars allow you to provide them that additional funding under the direction of this group. The other thing that it does for localities is it allows the localities, in working with their planning staff and looking at their comprehensive plan and looking at their zoning and looking at transportation planning and providing some methodology by which you can determine where you think you would most like to see certain types of housing, and the housing analysis comes in, and there's obviously it's a consultant that does this across the state, and then they can provide the support of the type of housing that you think you need. Does the market support it? Or if it doesn't support it, what is the delta and development support that you need to bring that in?
What's the area that's going to be studied?
The Virginia housing application, that's what.
Is it the region? Is it the counties in the region and the
It
city?
can be the counties in the region. The way the application works, it allows up to $20,000 for each county and city. It does not provide funding for towns, but towns are included within the counties.
So I have another question, and that is, I don't need a study that says, oh, you could use housing here and you could use housing there. I don't need any studies because I'm not building any houses. What I need is a study that a developer can take to his bank and say, see, this is a place that needs housing. They need this much housing of this level of quality. Would you give me a loan to build in that area? Will this do that? I don't need to be told where to build houses because I'm not going to build any houses. But a developer who needs to get money needs to be able to justify that. Now, that's what you talked about.
Yeah, because they'll have
Did
to,
this study do what she
if
talked
it's a
about?
housing feasibility study, yes.
With it can, and the opportunity is, and this is Roanoke that they recently did. Each locality created their own RFP that had to have some continuity, obviously, because you're getting one consultant. But yeah, perform land suitability assessment, sites for potential housing, access potential selected site to determine barriers for development. And that's where you brought in your financial folks to see who, what are the opportunities to assist in your barriers.
To the barrier point, one of the things I've seen through these in the past is you get back to your land use decisions. Or maybe the study may show that there is a demand or a market for such and such, but that doesn't match up to your zoning. I mean, you may have land use restrictions, and that's a decision. I mean, you may not want to change your zoning to make that happen, but at least then you know that if I want to make this happen, I need to change this lever over here to allow it to happen. So that's, without that, you're just operating in the dark.
So
That's
Kelly,
a given.
each municipality would have a targeted RFP under the umbrella of a regional RFP? Is that what you're
Yes.
saying?
Yes, each locality is eligible, will receive $20,000 as a PDC. We put in an application collectively because that's how Virginia Housing does it. And each locality would be, you're up to $20,000 for each locality. And we create, and so kind of the ask tonight is support with the concept. And the follow-up to that is who within your locality would be the primary point of contact? Because what we need to do in developing this application is develop an RFP that gets to make it the assurance that what will be developed is what each locality wants to see. And then the secondary is that a letter of support from each locality that they will participate in the regional housing study.
When I reached out for a housing study for Alta Vista, Tech quoted me $35,000, just FYI.
So are we gonna end up, 20,000? Is that gonna be enough to buy something? If Alta
No.
Vista alone is 35.
Well, you're getting the
No,
grant
It'd
through
be
this.
100,000, right? If
That was
every
Virginia
locality
Tech prices.
participates.
Well, 100,000 in 5 communities, that's 20,000 a community.
Correct. Because that's the way the grant is set up, that each locality that participates is up to $20,000. So yes, you get the impact of collective bargaining.
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Yes, sir.
So we got 450,000 for an actual development that we haven't spent much time talking about. So, okay, so then we get to 1.5 left. We're having a lot of conversation about $100,000 study. Quite frankly, who cares? You get what you get. You don't have a fit. If it's useful, you use it. If you don't, you don't.
Right.
So is that 100,000 coming out of the 1.5 I've got left after we do? Okay, so
It's a
thank you.
completely separate.
So I got 1.5 left in the pot. I have a market analysis on housing. Is there going to be a connection between the market analysis and the 1.5, how to leverage 1.5 to meet the analysis? Because we just showed that 2 million ain't going to get us very far. And we're going to be left with 1.5 if we take up the Rush Homes thing. So how are we leveraging that to really have it be any kind of meaningful? Or do we just get another project to build another 400 homes and be done with the grant? And if we're doing that, I don't need the market analysis at all. So I'm all for the market analysis. Information's good. It will be a study that sits on a shelf. But I want to know what we're going to do with the next 1.5 and how you optimize that.
Well, we still have to go back and talk about the Rush Homes part, because I mean, 1.5, 2 million, I mean, there's not a decision made on that yet either.
I mean, I would hope that this study would, I'm a little confused if it's multiple studies or one study.
Yeah.
But if it's, I would hope that it would come with a process to determine that 1.5. And ideally, because other PDCs do this, you can get recurring grants down the road, and that process can be utilized in year 4 and year 6 in terms of how to leverage extra home money down the road.
That is what I'm hoping the answer is. And if that's the answer, and we got a 3-year time ticking on the 2 million, when's the market analysis get done? What's the timeline on that? How much time is left to put those pieces in place and queue up?
Great question. And that's exactly, that's why I want each locality, if you have a representative, that will be used to develop the RFP so that the study is providing information. So it won't be used on the shelf, and it will be used to inform and guide some development opportunity. And that same group will be used to inform the decision-making and the metric that will be used in the expenditure of that 1.55 that's remaining for the Virginia housing. And from a timing standpoint with it, my thought is because we need to develop the application, which has to be developed, through an RFP that every locality needs to look at, get the support from the localities, an application that we could put in October. They said they could have it by November, and it's about a 6-month study.
So we don't have this money yet? We're still talking about just applying for it? I thought
The $2 million we have.
we already have the 2 million.
Yes.
So we're in the housing business.
So by
Yes,
the
and,
end of
but it is
the
2
fiscal year, the study will be finished.
Right, so here's the thing, we have 2 things in front of us, and
That's
we're kind of mushing them all up into one thing, which I hate, because it's like 2 separate
They are.
questions we have in front of us. One is this, do we want to go down this regional housing study, which would give us additional information, would open up the door to more grants, and doesn't cost us anything because it's coming out of a whole different pot of money. Then you have to decide, do you want to spend this $450,000 on this Rush Home thing so that we can check the box on what we have to produce with the $2 million. Now, Rush Homes, great, love it. Love the fact we checked the box. Feel like you pushed the easy button on checking the box for that for the $2 million. I will say though, from a optics point of view about how it looks with the PDC and who you're serving, I would hope that if we're doing a $450,000 project with the 2 million in the city of Lynchburg, that then when we get the study that shows the regional housing needs, that we're then going to apply the bulk of the remainder of the money throughout the rest of the region, because otherwise the optics on the overall expenditure of the $2 million looks off. So with that being said, supportive of the regional thing, supportive of Rush, but I want to put the note in there right now that we better be thinking about what the 1.5 million does in the rest of the region.
Because I guess my question, and maybe this might be a better Reed question, Winter, but I mean, Lynchburg has a housing authority, correct? And you're a home recipient and all that type of stuff. So how does that maybe work into all of this or not?
Yeah, so I don't know if Rush has worked with housing authority on this project or not. So city council has adopted and approved this development. So that's certainly something.
on page 5, the city is putting in 725,000 of their home funds. So the investment of the 450,000 would be 5% of the total. And that's of the total 8 million. It would be 8% of the construction, because again, my caveat, if you folks approve the 450, would be that it would be exclusively to construction. We would not, it wouldn't be in any of the soft costs associated, because it's easier for us to track. And I think that also sets up a precedent that we can do for all future development. It can be, in instances where maybe you need the land development side, but kind of get out of the soft cost side, get out of the developer profit side, and get into the direct dollars that are easy to track, easy to maintain. And so it's 8% of their total construction costs of the 8 million. I can tell you that we, again, from Virginia Housing's perspective, they will support this, which I asked, because when our contract specifically said that we worked in developing a plan for expenditure of dollars, and that we had, that process. So I was like, well, and so I said, well, can we want to put in an application so we can develop the process.
So for my sake, I'm cool with the assessment. It's $100,000. It doesn't cost me anything. Maybe it's useful information. Maybe it's not. I'll know it when I see it. So it flips me back to the Rush Homes piece, right?
This is a two-part thing you need from us, right?
Right.
All right,
Really,
let's
they're
take
two
care of
very
the
different
100,000 first,
Yeah,
okay?
I'm all
So
in favor.
hoping to move this along a little bit. Okay, I will entertain a motion to go ahead and approve the 100,000, which doesn't cost us any, for the assessment study of the housing assessment study. Is that-
So moved.
I have a motion from Ms. Carter. May I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Mr. Mundy. Any further discussion on that? There being none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion is carried. Second one is the Rush Homes. Okay,
Frank had something.
right?
My only question is, how do we find the Rush Home project?
Well, I'm going to open that one up to her to figure it
You
out.
know, it looks fully vetted, council's fully vetted. There's city resources going in of no small amount. There's a delta, your turn, Kelly, between the funds they've raised so far and carrying this across the line. We've got grants to push it over. It checks the box. But were there any other projects that expressed an interest, or what was the back and forth on this?
There really has not been another developer or another instance where we have been contacted. They directly contacted us because we did put, right, the press release went out that we participated in the Virginia Housing Grant Program. It was in our newsletter, and they contacted us.
Got it.
And I have compared it, again, every PDC in the state entered into a contract with Virginia Housing somewhere between 2 million and 3 million. And about half, I'd say, are already working with one developer. We're actually pretty fortunate in that our one developer ticks the box, right? We got 10 extra on top of the 20, and we've got the ability to buy some time.
Virginia Housing knew that there was a gap in Rush Homes' budget.
So they-
And I think they told Rush Homes, they told Jeff.
Yeah.
And so Jeff contacted us. So, and Virginia Housing is fine with us using that money, even though they're putting their own money into Rush Homes as well.
The housing authority works with other developers, not generally this one. Are any of the others involved in this?
I work with Rush Homes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they've done a lot of work.
Ms. Carter?
I just want to see that, I know that every locality has got folks that are doing these things. So in Amherst County, in the town of Amherst, that's Habitat for Humanity. And the executive director can squeeze a dollar out of a dime. And I know that there's a lot of other folks like that out in these communities. And just because Rush Homes was positioned at this moment to do this thing, I'm not saying I don't want them to have it. I'm not saying it's not a good use of the funds. We can check the box and then take all the pressure off. But I really want to make sure then that we're very intentional about going out and making sure that in each of the other jurisdictions, we're going, hey, who's your person? What is the programmatic element we're going to put in place to get that money out throughout the region? So that we don't have, when we go to our respective boards and councils and say, hey, it's going up 3 pennies. What did you get for it? Well, hey, that's that same organization that made this project over here where they built these 5 houses and they donated this money. And
When I was
it's
in Pulaski with the NRB PDC, they set up that process that I was talking about earlier, and it was a rotational. They got whatever grants it was, they received those grants on a annual or semi-annual basis. And it was this study kind of set up a process, kind of a rotational basis. So it was like Pulaski or Pulaski County. Well, in 2024, you're going to get $600,000 coming your way. Work with your development community, identify a project, and that, a couple years down the road type of situation. And of course, this time we would have 1.5 million kind of seed money to get started.
They did start with their Virginia housing study. That is how the NRV started their process, was with the needs assessment process. That's exactly right.
And Ms. Carter, basically what, if I understand what you're saying is, okay, this thing with Rush is in Lynchburg, but let's don't dump the whole thing in Lynchburg. If Rush runs back again and says, I want to build another set somewhere in the same pot, let everybody get a chance to dance.
I feel like we need to be intentional, actually issue invitations out to other folks, because essentially that's what happened with Rush. Might not have been the PDC that issued the invitation to dance, but they got an invitation to dance that at this point, no one else in the region has gotten. So I just want to make sure that, that goes back to that whole thing of, we're regional. We don't want to just see all of those things. No offense.
Yeah, no offense, Winter.
It really just is about making sure that those optics are kept right. And maybe the invitation to dance gets issued to providers in all the other localities. And at the end of that time frame, there's still $800,000 left, and Rush comes back and they've got another project that they're ready to, or another developer that works with your housing authority.
Well, I get that point. I agree. We need to share it around to the degree we can, but I'm also hoping the assessment is a data-driven conversation. So total anecdote isn't data. I have a mother-in-law who is disabled and needs income-based housing. She is able to find that in Lynchburg, right? And so she's able to have a safe, sanitary place to live in the city of Lynchburg. So opportunities may be more specific to certain jurisdictions. There's mass transit. She's proximate to the hospital. You want a McMansion on 2 acres? I'm your guy. I got space for that. I think we need to be intentional, as you said, by inviting, but we also need to remember we are, got to be regional, and we got to set some of that parochialism aside and see what the analysis suggests the market need is, because we're trying to lift the whole region up, right? So I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth and saying, I want us to spread it as we can, but I also want us to apply it to the area of need so that we get the most return on our leverage.
Well, that's the invitation to dance. If there's not anybody who can demonstrate something, then it's ultimately just going to go back to being this pool of money, and Lynchburg may very well be.
I think we did that in the NRV. I think there was some situations where a jurisdiction would defer or something like that because of those reasons.
It wasn't a quality.
Yeah, and that's a process they set up. That doesn't mean we have to do the same thing.
May I ask, where's Rush Homes based out of?
That's
Lynchburg.
They are, okay.
But they have put a facility in Amherst County.
Well, I'm just trying to make sure this is not some.
Yeah, they're not an absentee corporate, they're local.
Okay. All right. And there has been some experience with them before, just because as you start to distribute monies, we don't want what happened to.
You want to be embarrassed.
Yeah, like what happened in Amherst, right?
It's a great project they did. They did the Armstrong School off Bedford Avenue. That's now low to moderate income housing. They've done a wonderful job.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to make sure we've done our due diligence in that respect as well, because obviously the governor didn't do that a number of years ago, and that came back to bite him.
All right. So it looks like the question on the table now is, do we want to show support? Were you stopping me or were you asking?
No.
Oh, I thought you go like that. I thought you were going to interject something. Show support for Rush Homes for the 450. And then we have our other pot there that kind of slows the clock down. And so we can work forward from there. Is that correct? Okay, I will entertain a motion for that.
So moved.
Motion from Mr. Winter.
Second.
Second from Ms. Carter. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Gary.
Thank you. Thank you
Quickly.
very much. At our last meeting, we talked about adding Juneteenth to the PDC holiday list. And we also discussed, well, why don't we just follow the state Virginia list? And so I did the research to compare the PDC holiday list to the state of Virginia holiday list. To follow the state of Virginia holiday list, we would be adding Election Day as well as Juneteenth. And 4 hours before Thanksgiving, on Wednesday before Thanksgiving.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion from Megan. May I have a second, please?
Second.
Second from Mr. Rogers.
I'll just say, I mean, I'm sure I'll sign off on this. However, more and more, we're seeing like election day is not even election day anymore. You know, with the early voting, it used to be you needed to get off so that you could go vote. Now with early voting, you know, it's not even a day anymore.
It's just another form of handout is what it is.
Yeah.
That's the one holiday we decided not to take.
Yeah. And so
Half of our staff is working that.
So in Bedford County, we opted not to make that a county holiday, just because of, you know, when early voting was, you know, either absentee or maybe a week or two is a different story, but now it's like, you know, half the year, it seems like. And there's cost associated with that.
Any further discussion? The motion on the
Respond to that,
floor.
or-
And I commend it if you'd like, but
If no further discussion, we'll call for the vote. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed?
Yes.
Um,
I can't support it if I'm not supporting it for the county.
No sweat. So however many in one.
Thank you. Back,
I'm glad I keep y'all amused.
we started the PDC in 1969 with no General Assembly members. General Assembly members were added as voting members, one from the House of Delegates, one from the State Senate in the reorganization in the year 2000. Since that time, their attendance and participation has been limited.
You're being kind.
last one I remember attending was Scott Garrett.
Mine's been limited and I'm killing now.
So now to change, it means a charter change. We have to have a majority of elected officials on our board. So we would have to look at the entire board to look at their different options. And a charter change requires 6 or more jurisdictions to approve the change. So
But their membership affects the quorum count, right?
Yes.
By virtue of there being a member of the quorum, we have to have more
No,
people
no.
here to hold a quorum.
We have a bylaws that allows a quorum, that sets a quorum at 6, regardless of how many people.
Okay.
So it's not a matter of quorum. It's just that they don't show up
Then I would,
and often have different perspectives from local government.
then I would say, if it doesn't affect the quorum, because I see where you're going. I mean, if they're rarely here and then it makes our requirement to be here even greater, that's probably not a good thing. But if it doesn't affect the quorum count, I do think that there's merit in having them participate when we can. I think maybe we just need to maybe remind them that, you know, their presence and, you know, their perspective would be appreciated. You know, I know that, you know, I get busy and, you know, maybe they've got other things going on as well, or maybe they're in Richmond at times, but I do think if we remove them, then.
You close the door.
Yeah.
Leaving it the way it is, the door is open. If they choose to walk through it, then they do.
Right.
And they don't.
Do they get the same reminder email that we do?
Sure.
So candidly, I don't disagree. I think leave it alone, but you know, I'm not in hot pursuit to get them here. They're very busy. They do have a different priority set than us. I think it's the sort of thing you call it in when you need it. You know, they're a member of the PDC. We respect that the demands on them are different from all of us. And when we've got a state budgetary issue or something like that, that's when you remind them, hey, you're on the PDC. We'd like to have your support on this.
For us.
Can we talk to you a little bit about that? But, you know, I wouldn't even, quite candidly, pepper them with a bunch of reminder calls or emails. I'd respect that, hey, they're on. They'll be here if they could. They get the same distribution the rest of us, and kind of keep the powder dry, if you will, not sweat it too much.
Do they get an opportunity at the chairmanship?
No, by locality.
And
I mean, that would be a reason to show up. This is your year to chair it.
I don't think.
I don't think
Having the
Not
ability.
that they want
having
to
the-
show up, yeah.
I don't, so this is being recorded. It's not that I don't want them to show up.
well,
I want them to respect the fact that maybe this isn't their number one priority. And as quite candidly, as I reflect on our discussion that I can actually remember, I haven't needed the input of a state elected official to help inform the conversation, particularly when we get local electeds to buy in and participate. That's a very meaningful discussion. When we have needed them is when we're going to the state about a facility in Amherst that shall remain nameless because I'm tired of hearing it. It needs money and that sort of thing. And they've been very responsive to my recollection. So I just don't think there's a there in terms of defining this as a problem.
I think there's opportunity for them to call in and listen, and whether it's them or their staff, I think maybe that could be the emphasis for them.
and just one thing that in my world, if we boot them, then if we call for that favor, I might not get it. I mean, that little extra favor, if you, because they go, hey, y'all didn't want me to be part of your group.
Can I suggest we move on to the next agenda item?
That was going to be my next one. Let's move on.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the discussion. I canceled the speaker at the October meeting, Dr. Chris Yamura, out of concern that we would not receive a very good attendance because of the COVID-19.
So it's not going to be a dinner then?
So it's not a dinner, just
That's regular.
straight meeting. Now, if folks disagree, we can reschedule for another month, but I canceled that.
Well, at present, I think we're supposed to go back to masks on October 8th. From Dolly,
Holy Rex.
the Dolly regs are going to come out.
Oh, the what regs?
Department of Labor and Industry.
You have a
So they set a date?
conversation from Megan about the November meeting. We have a meeting scheduled for the 18th of November. Do you have an?
Yes, Megan.
Yeah, November 18th, for those, which is everybody in this room, that are members of the Alliance, partners of the Alliance, the board will be having a board retreat on November 18th and 19th. And so on November 18th, the regularly scheduled board meeting is from 3 to 5. And so we would have our strategic planning would kick off at 3 to 5 and then roll into a reception dinner, which wouldn't go till very late, but it would extend to allow us to do some really good and relevant strategic planning. So Gary wanted me to bring that to your attention because you all have scheduled a PDC meeting on November 18th at 5 o'clock.
So we're asking you to either let Megan know that we're going to call a PDC meeting that day or to reschedule, pick a different day for our PDC meeting.
Can we give you a
November
decision
meeting.
on the October meeting? Let everybody
Yeah.
ponder it.
Yeah, and see what kind of business we're going to be facing in
Yeah.
November, whether we can just defer the meeting.
Yeah.
So everybody set that on the agenda. We'll discuss it. We'll bring it up again on the October meeting and give Megan.
Yeah, at the very least, you all I would like to believe that you'll participate from 3 to 5.
So
Right.
I'm going to be at the PDC.
And if you have to leave at 5 o'clock to
You're
go to
taking it away from me,
PDC.
Megan. I've got a conflict.
Okay. Is that good though, Megan? We'll
Yeah,
do that.
I see what this is now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have our retreat. It will begin at 3 o'clock. And if you got to skedaddle at 5, or just maybe step in another room real quick and then come back. We got that big old building over there.
All right.
I was asked,
She just volunteered space
Yeah.
and she'll provide hors
Anything
d'oeuvres.
else, Gary?
I was asked one of the counties if we were providing redistricting services for when the census numbers come out related to changing the jurisdiction boundaries within the magisterial districts. We don't have a planner who has that kind of GIS capability, although it may be that the Census Bureau will have a platform to be able to do that without GIS expertise. Philip Gavatula is moving from our shop to Laramie, Wyoming, as their principal planner. So we will be shorthanded, but we could coordinate a bidding process for a consultant, contractor to do that if jurisdictions need us. So then my question is, have you thought about how you're going to do your examination of of your magisterial districts within the county.
And we haven't had an in-depth discussion, but we use our GIS staff and they have the tools from Esri and the latest and greatest census that'll be collated with all that. So we're just planning to do it in-house. We've done it before in-house and I think the GIS tools are even better now. So we'll be able to handle that even more effectively, at least from our perspective.
Anybody else?
Ditto from Campbell.
What I expected to hear, but I just wanted to make sure that we had communication for one.
All right, next scheduled meeting is October 21st at 5.
Let me ask you one more thing. Are you looking at hiring bonuses for your staff to fill slots? Anybody looking at hiring bonuses?
We haven't discussed it at the board level anyway.
Staff level, we just introduced the concept maybe 2 weeks ago. And that's all it was. Like, hey, have you thought about this? So it's very early in that conversation.
Kind of similar. I mean, we've had some staff discussion, but there's some good list of pros and cons of how that works.
In our world, Rosalia served for 20 years as our finance director. She's retiring. We haven't gotten a lot of applications, and just looking at whether or not that is an option for us in order to increase the pool.
We've been motivated to consider it by the same problem, openings that you can't get good candidates for, and is there something else we can do to attract them? But that's just been a very small group of staff brainstorming, nothing beyond that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. With that, I will accept a motion to adjourn.
Thanks, everybody, for your work.
Mr. Sharp,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Lucas. Everybody say aye. Go home, ladies and gentlemen.